Okay, so we're continuing with Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering. We're now on page 12, Campaign Design. A campaign can be designed on the fly or from the bottom up. A campaign created on the fly starts with an adventure, generally in the default style and setting of the rules set you've chosen. From one adventure to the next, you slowly add elements to it. Gradually, it takes on a life of its own. The advantage of this approach is that you can respond to players' choices, developing the aspects of your setting that they seem most interested in. The theme, tone, recurring NPCs, and important settings of your campaign all arise more or less spontaneously. You don't have to think so much about addressing the tastes of your group, it all just happens naturally. On-the-fly campaign development also suits GMs whose schedules don't allow them big chunks of prep time. On the other hand, some of us are better at advanced planning than thinking on our feet. The internal consistency and vision of a grand plan may be more satisfying than the meandering feel of an improvised campaign. Planning may stop us from falling back on old habits and first impulses. If your villains or shopkeepers or fight sequences follow a noticeable pattern after a while, you may want to make advanced notes to consciously sidestep your favorite cliches. All else being equal, you may want to take into account the tastes of your playgroup. The more control a player prefers over the continuing storyline, the happier they'll be in an improvised campaign. Method actors may likewise feel constrained within plot lines that fail to address their characters' motivations. Storytellers may enjoy the grand sweep of a thoroughly planned story. Sometimes it's not so much a matter of whether you've planned, but what sort of prep work you've done. Tacticians tend to distrust elaborately plotted campaigns because they feel they're being driven to a certain point no matter how adroitly they scheme. At the same time, they favor deeply detailed worlds that grow and change independent of PC actions. Genre. Anyway, before I move on to genre, what do you guys think of those paragraphs there?
I'm starting to think that he should have used saboteur instead of tactician.
Okay.
Like everything he describes, tactician. I'm like, this isn't what you're describing is just someone who's trying to throw you off the rails, not necessarily that they're so involved in. I don't know. Getting a little salty with his terminology. Sorry, just a little aside.
No, that's fine. I love it. Omar?
I didn't mind the use of tactician.
Okay. What about just his general comments there throughout?
Yeah, it's fine. He has a way of just going through his words very normally. He gets his point across very early, and it seems he just keeps going.
Yeah, kind of states the obvious, and then, yeah.
Just keeps repeating it,
yeah. Well, and part of that is you give your overall concept, and then you drill deeper. That's
fair enough. It's more just he just basically says everything that needs to be said, and then just says it in a different way.
Okay. Jonathan,
again,
are you still with us?
Yes, I am. I like how it's tying GM preferences in preparation to play style of players.
Yes. Yeah. And that's an ongoing...
Although I think most people probably have some kind of cross identity thing. I don't think anyone is fully an actor versus tactician versus murder hope. I think that people have a bit of each in them. Though it tends to be the case in my experience that the strongest personalities kind of drive the overall character of the party. So
yeah. So we do a lot on player archetypes, and they're a starting point rather than a constraint. We talk about archetype versus stereotype.
right.
So yeah, and we don't necessarily agree with his definitions of player types, as we feel like they need to be broken up a little bit more, and he clearly has kind of a negative. You can see his bias. His has a more negative spin on some of the archetypes than we all use entirely. The key thing is, are they disruptive? Right. That's really where it matters. Is if it's going to become a disruptive issue, then being able to recognize a series of traits that fits a certain archetype could help you to avert disruption if you have that recognition of it happening.
Right. Well, and one thing I'm curious about is this is pie in the sky level stuff, but I wonder behaviorally if you can actually, so we call them gaming archetypes, but I'm wondering if they're actually tied to personality constructs, and if you could develop a valid and reliable scale to determine if people really fall into groups. It wouldn't be too difficult to do, although I think the harder part would be somehow coding behaviors, to determine that, someone is doing something more than another. So
we've been trying to do that.
It's way beyond my mortal ken.
Well, we've been trying to do exactly that because we have player archetype specialists as a specific role, because we use them to train our game masters. These guys are specifically trained to make life difficult for our game masters, so our game masters learn how to de-escalate them, because you're going to run into, they're exaggerations of what you run into in the real world, and so it helps our game masters train to address these types in the real world. And so we have our player archetype specialists start just taking notes and writing down observations of behavior, and then trying to look for anything that tallies off that might fit under. We've got about 20 or so player archetypes we've been slowly trying to improve the definition of. Still needs a ton more work, but it's a good starting point. And then as they learn to observe behavior, just like any actor, then they have to emulate that behavior, because I will pass them a post-it that says, okay, you're going to be the cheater gamer, you're going to be the rules lawyer, you're going to be the munchkin player, right? And so they get a post-it, and they're supposed to know, okay, that's these traits that I need to, express through these behaviors. And then the GM has been trained, or will learn to be trained, on how to de-escalate those behaviors and keep the game running. So
yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, so that's something I've been working on for years, and it's getting slowly. We've got a play archetype specialist training manual we've been working on, and slowly coming along.
Yeah, I kind of further musing on this, not to steal up time.
No, this is what we're here for.
But I wonder if you had a couple of different scales, which wouldn't need to be, they would just need to be reliable.
That's the challenge.
They kind of ask people what they preferred. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They kind of ask people what they prefer to do in game, and
yes.
then you maybe broke up game behaviors into interaction, exploration, and combat.
Yeah, well,
and you ran a exploratory factor analysis on that. I wonder if you would find latent constructs that related to actual archetypes.
And that is where
probably would.
Right, Bartle's taxonomy of player type and a few others, we draw upon those concepts in our intake assessments and such to help us try to figure that out. So it's still being refined, but we are drawing on such tools.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're still working on it, but it's coming along, and it's very, when it works, it's very helpful. We just got to keep refining it, making it more valid and reliable. So, but it is a goal. You're saying it's pie in the sky and beyond your ken, but no, this is one of our goals because it's a key part of our training approach.
It's beyond my ken because I'm terrible at factor analysis and all of that structural equation modeling stuff.
Yeah. Well, we're bringing in lots of different people from various backgrounds, so I'm hoping between all of our different complementary skills that eventually all of this will come together. So some of it's way beyond me being able to do on my own, but between everybody's help, I think we'll get there. That's the collaboration. All right, genre. Whether you're improvising or planning, you'll first need to decide what category of action-adventure you want your campaign to fall into. Now, I have a little note here that says it doesn't have to be action-adventure. That's not the only type of role-playing game. But he pretty much, that is very telling that that's pretty much what he always is talking about here. But I just have that little note there. Often your chosen rule set dictates a genre. If you've chosen a rule set that supports multiple genres, the choice remains up to you. That would be like VRRPG or GURPS or something like that, where they support all sorts of genres. Pick a genre that interests you, whether it supports the plot device you have in mind, involves imagery that appeals to you, or arises from a book or movie you'd like and want to emulate. Again, it never hurts to stop and consider the tastes of your group before picking a genre. When in doubt, ask them what they like. But expect as many different responses as you have players. Our attraction to or disinterest in various genres can be subjective. It's just not something that can be argued logically. You may want to run an anime game, but if one of your most enthusiastic players tells you they're not interested because Japanese animation is weird, you may have to resort instead to an old favorite. Fantasy tends to be a more popular genre in role-playing circles than in the media culture at large because, it supports a wide range of play styles. It also justifies the largest set of possible crunchy bits. Jonathan, did we cover for you what he means by crunchy bits?
Yeah.
Okay, good. If your players don't seem sure of their own preferences or are greatly at odds, he says, fantasy is always a reliable default choice. I underline that and circle the always, and I say no. Fantasy is not always a reliable default choice. It might be for existing gamers, but if you're bringing in new people and such, it is not. Fantasy can turn some people totally off. There are people who just are not into either fantasy or sci-fi or both. It varies. So I'm just being nitpicky about the always. Fantasy is also extremely pliable, allowing you to sneak in the key elements of the genre you originally favored without notice or complaint. Change the mutant information virus from the cyberpunk game they didn't want to play into a magical curse, and you're off to the races with no one the wiser. Player tastes may point you towards a genre your group will sign on for. If you're heavy on power gamers, you know you need to pick something wild and woolly where characters routinely perform superhuman acts. You may need to hold off on your game of realistic military action until you've assembled a game composed mostly of tacticians. Likewise, a game of Machiavellian court intrigue should probably wait until your storytellers and method actors greatly outnumber the butt kickers. Comments on that?
Makes sense. Tailor your game to the players you have. Makes perfect sense to me. I still think you should have elements where you push people.
Yeah. Expand them beyond their
stretch
comfort
their
zone.
boundaries.
Yeah. You always want to grow people beyond their comfort zone a little bit.
I don't think it's healthy for... I mean, I don't think it's necessarily unhealthy, but I personally don't think there's a lot of value in playing the same thing over and over and over.
Well, for some people, that's a great comfort. I mean, you have people literally who always play the same character in every campaign. And it's good to try to get people to break out of those rigid modes of thought and behavior to have new experiences. But it really depends on what your goals are. You know, and maybe that's the best way to teach them something new within the context of something they're comfortable with, rather than creating too much discomfort. Omar, comments?
I'm still hung up on him saying fantasy is always a safe choice. I'm trying to get where he's coming from, but I just...
he's got some heavy biases. He's a self-admitted control freak GM who believes that all GMs are control freaks. B, he seems to have an antagonistic relationship with his players rather than cooperative relationship on the whole, at least from the examples he keeps using. And C, he has, he has the, and you've heard me talk about this, in geek culture, there's a lot of, we're such a big group, we must be the majority. And I'm sorry, folks, in geek culture, you're a minority, not a majority. A growing minority, a group willing to spend a lot of money to make things highly successful, but not the majority. But it's really easy when people are surrounded by their own bubble to think that that's all there is. And I think he's got that same bubble effect going on there.
I've got to go now.
Okay.
It's good talking to you guys. I appreciate it.
You too. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan. See you next week. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Well, actually, I'll see you at the con.
Right.
Yeah. He's got some assumptions that are clearly based on his own experience and is extrapolating them to mean that should always be the way it is, and we just always have to take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, it's just funny because out of every genre you could choose, generally the only one that I would not be into is probably fantasy.
Interesting.
And he was like, "It's the safe one." I'm like, no.
Yeah, well, but exactly, that's been my point to a lot of people. So,
I think the point he's trying to get there is that because it's so open-ended and
it is flexible.
It can be very free-form and flexible.
Yeah, if you can get people,
it's so safe.
well, if you can get people over their hang-up against fantasy, then it's great because it is an incredibly flexible genre. You can really make up your own rules. Tolkien wrote at length in his essay on Myths and Critics about the value of fantasy for teaching and how much more effective it is than using reality. Just that fantasy is an incredibly powerful modality for learning. And it is. There's a lot of research to support that. But if people have a hang-up against fantasy, they're going to be resistant to the activity. It doesn't mean they can't enjoy it, but you're going to have to work harder to overcome that. And you should not assume that just because you like fantasy that everybody else must as well, because, again, that's a minority. If you look at the bookshelves at the store and everything, there's a very small section for fantasy compared to everything else that's out there. So it's just always something to remember. Yeah, and Omar, that's a great example that you're not into fantasy role-playing, you're not in the fantasy genre either, so that's an excellent example. The setting. Having chosen a genre, the next step is to work out where the action will take place. If you're working on the fly, you may need nothing more than a few key phrases or images, which you'll flesh out as you go. Serious planners may wish to make extensive notes on both the world and the general area in which the first adventures will take place. Published settings. Many published games provide a default setting, often one portrayed in great detail over a wide range of supplements. Sticking to a pre-established setting has its advantages. First, it's much less work. Reading supplements is a much quicker process than writing them. Another factor not to be underestimated is the degree to which published settings are readily understandable and therefore appealing to players. You may find it easier to recruit new players if your games are set in an established and popular world. People can only take in a certain amount of information on any topic in any one sitting. Players can learn much more about a setting by reading supplements over a period of months or years than you can impart to them in a few sessions of play. So, rule number 8, there is no shame in using an established setting. What do you guys think of that so far?
That one I actually do agree with.
Oh yeah.
It's just straight up easier.
Yep. Totally.
The last campaign that I ran, I tried to build the setting and everything from the ground up, which went fine.
But it's a
But it was
lot of work. A lot of work. Yeah. And even in my own homebrew multiverse setting, I start with usually an Arthurian setting to help people have a starting point that they are familiar with, so it's not completely alien. So it's not an identical Arthurian setting, but it's an Arthurian-like setting. So there's Merlin, there's Camelot, there's Arthur, and it gives them a starting point, a reference point that helps them feel connected, at least starting out. And then it gets stranger and stranger over time, but at least it's done, gradually rather than all at once, so they can process the information bit by bit. I found that works a lot better than plunking them straight into some strange environment they know nothing about. They can feel pretty helpless and they can feel like it's too much on the GM's terms and that they don't have enough say in what's going on. So, yeah, that is the advantage of, even if you're doing your own campaign, at least using a world that is known by others, that can really help. Omar?
Yeah.
Yes.
What he said.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add about that. I always do build the world up from scratch for myself, but the issue with that is I find people nitpick.
Yeah, sure.
And then they just keep asking questions about things, and I'm like, is that really important?
Yeah.
So I stopped doing it, to be honest.
Okay. You stopped using established worlds?
No, and now I use established words. I stopped doing it from the ground up.
I see. Yeah. Right.
So I'll either pick something everyone's familiar with or something really famous.
And what I found is I can transition, is because I do a multiverse, I can start them with something they're familiar with and then slowly change it on them, and they're okay with it because it's being brought to them bit by bit.
Yeah, and see, I've had the opposite problem of Omar. People tend to nitpick more, for me at least, when we're in an established world, whereas if I've created something, they're less likely to be like, are you sure? Like, yeah, I know, I made this. You can't argue with me.
friends still argue with me. They don't care about that. They just ask the stupidest questions, and that really ruins it for the game because, like, other than anything else, that makes me really angry because I'm like, is that really what you're fixating on? I feel with established words as well, it's, especially if I use one that they're more familiar with than I am, they kind of know stuff, so they don't have to ask.
Yeah.
Well, it's my world, they have no idea, so they ask about everything.
Right.
And some of those questions are really warranted because, you know, I can't possibly cover everything at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yep. Another key advantage of established worlds is that players who've read the source material bring a predetermined set of emotional associations to the gaming table. So I have a comment there that could be a problem. That's pros and cons. It's a two-edged sword. If they bring predetermined set of emotional associations to the gaming table, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. It just depends. They're invested in the world before you roll your first die. Some folks criticize game companies whose supplements are heavy on background material and fiction snippets, complaining about the ratio of useful material to fluff. It may not be apparent how useful so-called fluff can be to a GM in laying the atmospheric groundwork for you. Let's say you have the party encounter an NPC whose appearance and mannerisms clearly mark them as a member of a formidable and scary group. In a setting of your own creation, you have to stop and explain what the group is, what the signs are, and why the adventurers should be quaking in their boots. You're telling the PCs that the group is scary, and they'll accept that on an intellectual level. But it'll be hard to make them feel it. If you're instead using an established setting that at least a couple of the players are familiar with, all you will have to do is describe the NPC, including a few visual signifiers of their group affiliation. Without any further prompting, they'll react emotionally, exclaiming, "Oh no, it's a Tremere," or a Humakti, or whatever. While reading the source material, they've already been shown, as opposed to merely told, why members of this group should creep them out. So number 9, fluff ain't so fluffy as it looks. Comments on that?
I could see where he's coming from. I think it depends on your GM at that point.
Sure.
Like, in this specific example, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because not everybody's going to read the source material either.
No, of course
They're
not.
going to look at that overview and be like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And then come to you. You're still going to have to describe it.
Yeah.
I think he has a little bit of a over expectation.
Well, I don't think he has many casual gamers, and I think and he's kind of poo-poos the casual game a little more. What's that?
No, I'm just saying, I can't imagine him having many casual. I can't.
Yeah.
I don't think he has the tool. It doesn't seem like he has the tools necessary to deal with that. Oh, I didn't mean that as a diss. I just meant like, I don't think he'd be able to get down to a level where the person isn't familiar with everything.
Mm-hmm.
You'd just be confused and just blast through everything and just expect them to know everything. But
Yeah.
most people don't.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
See, when I GM, I have a pretty... I expect people not to know.
Right.
Because I have found that's more realistic in the people that I play with, which is fine. But yeah, he just seems to have a very experienced group all the time.
Right.
Who are very into it.
Exactly. And that may be his preference, and so that's what he goes with. Okay. If you're using an established setting, I strongly recommend that you allow your players to read any available supplements for it. Adventures you plan to use or cannibalize are obvious exceptions. But if you know you'll never use a particular adventure, try to get your players to read that too. The more the players know and feel about their imaginary world, the better. Then he emphasizes, do this even when a setting tells you not to. It's easier to get people to distinguish between player knowledge and character knowledge than it is to get them emotionally invested in an imaginary world. Many game lines overestimate the emotional value of surprise. Players spend way too much time feeling off balance and confused as it is. They're already wondering what's around the corner, who really belongs to the conspiracy they're tracking, what their enemies can do, and so on. It goes without saying that your players will be confused and puzzled for great stretches of any game session. Let the players, if not their characters, know what's happening in the macro level of the setting. So number 10, emotional investment is more important than the conservation of the setting designer's secrets. What do you guys think of that?
I think it comes down to being a good GM again, honestly. Like, I don't think your players need to have an intimate knowledge of everything beforehand. I just don't.
Yep. Omar?
This person just sounds like my fear if I ever do a random role-playing game that he'll be the GM.
Right, yeah.
Because I feel like he would not be very happy having me in his game.
Why do you say that?
He just, everything he describes, he's very presumptuous.
Oh, yeah.
That the other player is just gonna... He has a very strict idea of what the players should be doing.
Sure.
And I just would not be doing any of that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Not on purpose, I just don't think many people are... Is this book... When was this book published?
2001. 2002.
Oh, okay,
2002. So it's 16 years.
Not that recently.
Yeah, but it hasn't changed that much. But he's a GURPS guy too, so it's very specific. I think he has a lot of GURPS influence there.
I think maybe there was less casual gamers back then.
No.
No.
This is just his own particular bubble. So here's my comments on it. So when he talks about letting the players know, to know the setting, to try to have a more emotional connection, I get what he's saying, but I would not tell any players to read any modules or source books, like that are meant for game masters. They do occasionally make source books for players. There are like Dragonlance and a few others. They publish source books that were specific for players who want to understand the setting better. And for example, Midnight Chronicles, they have a 45-minute movie that they shot, an actual live-action movie that's actually pretty good, to introduce new players to the dystopic setting of Midnight Chronicles, which is basically if Sauron had won type setting. And it gives people a 45-minute kind of entertaining overview of what things are like and gets people ready and in the mood of, and they know what the different political factions are, and they're kind of ready to jump in and have a feeling for it. That's not a bad approach as far as helping people feel that connection. And if it's something that you like, it's Tolkien or Piers Anthony or whatever, an established book series, certainly you can encourage people to say, oh, well, go watch this movie or see this series or read this comic book or see this show or whatever, see this video. That can be a great way to help them feel a connection to the setting. So that part I agree with. I would never tell players to go read the adventure modules. Ever. That, I think, is lazy game mastering. I think it's the job of the game master to reveal their version of the module. And that's an inordinate amount of homework to mandate for your players. They're players, not game masters. Now, if you're training other game masters, that's a different story. But if they're all just players, so if you're like sometimes you do where everybody takes turns GMing in the same setting, then it makes sense. But if they're just players who just want to play, that's ridiculous. I would never recommend that. And as far as cost-benefit analysis there, he says the emotional investment is more important than the preservation of the setting designer's secrets. Totally disagree. Most people are not good at separating player knowledge from character knowledge. Like, even if they don't express it in their play, like they make their character not use player knowledge in the game, it's going to change their experience. They're going to lose the element of surprise that's part of the fun. It's like reading the end of a book for a mystery. You already know the ending. It's not as much fun as you don't know. And he talks about, well, they're going to be struggling with all these little confounds and such. And I'm like, well, yeah, but don't take away the main plot. So, yeah, I get where he's saying that for some pretty heavily invested players, but those are some hardcore gamers. Most gamers, I could not recommend that approach. But I do get what he's saying. If you can give them some good source material to help them feel connected with the setting, great. Do that. That will definitely help. And that's where, again, we go back to, it helps if it's an established setting. You know, Harry Potter or whatever, Star Wars, something like that, where people already have a pretty good knowledge. They don't know the module, but they know the setting, and they know who the people are. Yeah, they're going to have a more emotional connection, and that's great. Encourage them to go see the movies and stuff like that. But don't tell them to read the modules. Come on.
Give away all your secrets.
Well, yeah, and I don't have a problem with the secrets being given away, but that's not the appropriate role, I believe, between the game master and the player expectations. And I would have a rebellion if I made most of my players do that. And the players I would end up getting who are willing to do that would not be my favorite players. I might have one or two that would be fine, but someone would be like, oh, I'm afraid I get too many rules lawyers.
Right, and then it encourages them to be, well, and that's the thing I would hate to have, is to have players who were more knowledgeable about setting and things than I was, and then being like, well, actually, I'm like, oh, great, here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're good to go there. I will see you guys next Tuesday, because I assume none of you are going to be at PAX Unplugged.
Yeah, no,
I'll try, but I don't think I can.
Yeah. I don't know if anything's streaming or not, and if they're not recording, I will try to record the panels. And other people I'm with, I'll try to interview. And record sessions as well, so I can bring back some unique content. We'll see if that works out. But I'll see you guys otherwise Tuesday. So, Eric, if you can get me your draft, please try to pound that out. I mean, I'm gonna be getting on a flight Thursday afternoon, so if you can get it to me before I get on my flight, that'll give me time to look it over while I'm on the flight, and then when I land, I can email you my revision so we can get that published Friday morning.
I'm hoping to get some good solid, at least a couple hours a day this week, so it should be. Please do. I want to get that so we have something fresh on our blog when I'm talking about it on the panels. So, and that'll be a great topic to have there. Now, Omar, get yourself well. Don't stress about it. When you're feeling up to it, we'll start working on it, and we'll try to get that slammed out next week for you.
Sounds good.
All right. You guys have a wonderful night/day, and I'll catch you next week, or if not online sooner. Take care.
See you next week.
And those of you watching the stream, thank you for joining us. If you're a Patreon supporter, of course, you'll get uploaded the local, better quality version, and all the other previous versions you can get through our Patreon at patreon.com/RPG Research. Please do consider donating to RPG Research, a 501c3 nonprofit studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives. Wherever you may be well, happy gaming and namarie.